Does the left-wing media really exhibit more media bias than the right-wing media? We're answering a question here on TBTC today. Let's do it.
Hello, and welcome to the To Be the Church podcast, where we discuss how to truly be the church in today's culture. I'm Andrew with my friends Benjamin and Tyrone, Tyler.
Hello.
Welcome, everyone.
How you doing? Last episode of the year here. You know, it's New Year's Eve.
Wow.
How's everybody's Christmas?
Oh, man.
That's
Great.
so good.
So good.
Good.
Yep.
All right. So, Ben, we were posed with a question, not from our normal sources. This came via text message from somebody who has your phone number.
This person came right at me.
And this is a follow-up to something we had talked about previously, I guess.
So this is the last episode of the year, huh?
Dude, this is it.
Wow. 2021 sunsets with this question.
This is a follow-up from our Let's Go Brandon episode.
Okay.
Watch your mouth.
Do you realize what you've just said?
That's what it was called, wasn't it? Quick question from the video. Why does Andrew, and sometimes you, less so Tyler,
Nope.
it seems, speak about some universal issues as left issues? From this episode, there are two instances that stood out to me. One being when you said the creation of the euphemism exemplifies left-wing media's pattern of twisting the truth. You don't honestly believe that liberal media does that any more than conservative media, right? That's the question.
Didn't you have two examples?
He said there's two times, but he only gave us one of them.
Yeah. So I had said in that one that
I remember you saying it, and I was like, what did Ben just say?
the whole Let's Go Brandon thing was an example of how something is clearly being twisted to, like, you know, there's the facts of what the crowd was actually chanting, but then this reporter twists it. And so I think the conservatives who are kind of using it as a joke are just kind of pointing that out.
Yeah, and I think I said in
ways.
that episode, I think it's a bigger indictment on the media than it is on Biden, even for conservatives, for a lot of people that have grabbed onto it. Yeah. But so I own that. Less so Tyler did not say that. So
sometimes me.
And sometimes you.
So Andrew, what do you have to say for yourself?
I know. So read his thing again, the part that said honestly.
You don't honestly, please be honest.
Okay.
You don't honestly believe that the liberal media does that any more than conservative media, right?
I honestly do believe that. That's my answer.
Why?
Because mainly because they do. No, I think it's a matter of, so media malfeasance, I think, is the biggest story of our current cultural moment, and along with sort of the deterioration of trust in our institutions. But I think because of the media in our culture, that our trust in institutions is eroding even further because of, just all those things. So yeah, I think, is it true that these things happen on both sides of the media and political aisle? 100%. Like, of course, there's all sorts of crazy that happens on the left and all sorts of crazy that happens on the right. And I think the two sides, the more partisan they get, in terms of strategy, right? Like, paint your opponent as really ridiculous. And so the way that, and yourself as more moderate, right? And so the way that happens is from the left, they try to point out and, platform people on the right who do crazy things or do horrible things or whatever. And on the right, they try to do that with the left as well. So it does happen on both sides. But the question was, do you honestly believe that that's more on the left than it is on the right? There's not equivalence between the left and the right in my mind in our media narratives because of the amount of resource, cultural power, institutional gravitas that the left has versus the right. So there's, obviously you think of Fox News, and then now you think of like the Daily Wire, Shapiro, and all these guys. You realize the Daily Wire is like 5 years old, right? Like that wasn't even around like till 5 years ago. So basically you go back like 30 years and it's like, there's like Rush Limbaugh, there wasn't even Fox News like back then. And so it's like there's talk radio world that there's some aspect from the right, but the invention of the internet, in the last few decades, like that has really opened up a lot of alternative media sources. But when you talk about the institutional power that's on the left, all the major newspapers, the Academy, Hollywood, all the major news corporations that have the real assets and cultural pull, and they're able to streamline narratives and just make things be seen as true, that the right does not have that kind of power in the media infrastructure, right? And so do I think that's worse from the left than from the right? 1,000,000%. I honestly believe that. Like, I think if you look at do crazy things happen on both sides? Yes. But is there equivalence between how left-wing narratives are able to get cultural sway to them versus right-wing narratives? It's not even close, right? I mean, there's entire movements that, the way that the culture just responds to things that are as conspiratorial from the left as, the different conspiracies that are on the right. Only the conspiracies from the left become mainstream. They become mainstream like overnight. Like, that's just the way things are, right? The way we think about race in America, how much of that is determined by legit, totally false narratives that have come from the left but are just assumed as true, right? Versus the right. So I just think there's bad actors on both sides. I wouldn't disagree with that. There's crazies, there's partisanship, all that. But I just think it's really not close as it relates to the narratives the left side sows and is able to get traction with versus those on the right. So yeah. So
well, and if you think of like the major players and under like the banner of legacy media, it's going to be almost all on the left, right? I
mean, 100%.
Because you're going to have the magazines, but also like the New York Times and all of the newspapers, and then cable television, MSNBC, CNN, all those primarily left. So there is a lot. It's not a even playing field as far as outlets go.
I would answer this question differently. And I don't know if it's disagreeing with you or just coming at it from a different angle.
Yep.
And I would say I don't believe that they do it more than the conservative media does. I think their microphone is louder.
There you go.
I think that like they're both doing the same thing. Now I just I'd heard something about this recently, and they because of the disparity, the left owns so much more of legacy media. There's a political article recently about how Facebook specifically is far more right-leaning. And again, Facebook is what people are sharing, right? But the amount of shares, the amount of ad money spent on Facebook, I don't know, maybe we'll link to this article, but it talks about, there's a number in here somewhere, but about how left-leaning posts make the top 25 most shared posts daily, like at a much slower rate than the right wing does. And almost like social media is balancing the scales a little bit.
Yeah. And this is actually a big issue because even like the social media Facebook whistleblower that was in the news, 4 to 6 weeks ago, Facebook itself, Zuckerberg, the whole corporation is on the left. But the Facebook sharing stuff, because this goes back to 2016, the Facebook sharing stuff is way more on the right, and that's what I'm saying. The invention of the internet has allowed the scales to start to become more balanced, right? And so the way that the Daily Wire or another really popular shared guy on the right on Facebook is Dan Bongino. The way that these guys get traction is they post on their sites and then it gets shared by their followers via social media. So yeah, if you look at the top 25, I mean, Daily Wire, I think is the top on social media. It's just like far and away above any other outlet. And so there's a movement to try to get Facebook to censor more of those things and to only allow content. And it's like this is the constant battle that's going on, to only allow content from more legacy sources, because that would completely cut the legs out from under the right media. The way that the narratives from the right are able to get traction is they go up on the internet and then they get shared through social media. Like that's what they have. The left literally has everything else, right? There's no, NBC News, ABC, all the major news corporations are filled with, and this really isn't close. If you look through the giving to Democrats versus Republicans, or those registered as Democrats versus Republicans from ABC, NBC, it's like 99% of the employees are they donate to only Democrat causes. They're far and away. And you can see this when a different administration comes in, because like when the Trump administration came in, they would hire people for their comms department that would be people from Fox News, maybe people now who are on Newsmax, which is a relatively new thing from the right, or One American News, these kind of new right-wing news sites that are getting TV channels or whatever. They get people from that world. When Biden comes into play, they're hiring not just CNN people, they're hiring people from NBC News, they're hiring people from ABC. These are people that like become a part of their administrations because of how many people in those high-ranking positions in all these major news sources are on the left. And so, yeah, the microphone's bigger, Ty, and social media and internet. Like I said, that really balances the scale. That's the movement behind the trying to censor those from those platforms, because the fact checkers, which lean heavily left, they can try to cut the legs out from under them.
Is bias a bad thing? Because that's something you'll hear is like, there's media bias on either side, and almost as a way to kind of just, because it's bias, like it's not legitimate or anything like that.
I don't think bias is a bad, right. Bias is a thing. Bias
right.
is what it is. I don't think there's objectivity in it. And my argument for the last several years has been, there is no objectivity. The problem is when you feign objectivity. Right. And you're like, no, that side is biased, but we're actually really objective. And that's when, that to me is when something is a little bit off, is when there's a feigning of objectivity, and in the name of objectivity, no, these are the facts. And so there's certain things that there are factual things that are out there, the number of people who died in a certain thing or whatever else. But I think that's my issue, is that there's a lot of sites that, and there's hard news versus opinion. That's another aspect to it, right? And so, but a lot of stuff called hard news, like, well, this is just the facts, is just, there's the bias of stuff that's twisted and said that's actually false, and then there's the bias of like not reporting certain things and kind of, not even reporting a different story, but like literally just ignoring certain things that occur. And so that, I don't know what you'd call that, kind of the omission bias, right? Bias by omission of what's news or what isn't. So yeah, it's obviously, it's a difficult day in that sense, but I think in answer to that question, yeah, I think, like when I think about the craziness on the right, you think about the QAnon stuff or those different kinds of things. Like, yeah, and I know that there's some people that believe those things, and it's nuts, and we should say, hey, that's nuts. That's super crazy, right? And I think we do that, hopefully, on the right, when those things occur. But man, when you talk about some stuff on the left that's just patently false, that becomes what everybody believes about a story, like overnight, it's, and I think we could go down the rabbit hole of issues with COVID or race or any of these major hot button issues. And there are certain narratives that are like adopted by mainstream culture, and major sports leagues grab onto them and everything else. And you're like, that literally is like a false story, And I mean, we could go ad nauseum on the examples, but yeah. So I just I think the tendency to go, hey, it's both sides, and hey, it's all, there's no, when you're really tracking these things day in and day out, like it's I don't think the scales are as balanced as some like to say they are. But
one of the things that we just said a minute ago was that social media kind of balances the scales. And as we were saying that, I think I'm the one who said it at first, but I was thinking about it and I was like, man, that's also a bummer though, because there are not just algorithms on social media platforms that just cater to you, but a study came out just in the last couple of weeks that of the 20 top Christian pages as of October 2019 on Facebook, like most interacted with Facebook pages, that are Christian Facebook pages, 19 of them are run by troll farms, like in like Macedonia. Like to
what's
where
a troll farm?
It's like they create content and post to sow chaos, like slowly but surely. Yeah. And so Guideposts, that like Christian magazine, only Facebook page in the top 20 as of October 2019 in the Christian world that is actually a Christian, like American page. The rest of them are pages like, they're called Be Happy, Enjoy Life. Okay. Jesus is my Lord. Purpose of Life. Light of the World. Like, these are what the pages are called. And they are the most interacted with Facebook pages in Christianity, in the Christianity space. And so it's like, you know, it doesn't like quite go to right and left. I mean, it will go that way at some point, you know, like as these pages are being developed and stuff like that. But just like even social media is co-opted in such a way that's like,
yeah, it's like, you know, and that's where the argument for some is like, that's horribly wrong. And so we should clamp down, and then we should make certain cultural institutions the arbiter of what should be allowed to be shared or not, right? But then you go, it's like the idea of hate speech. It's like, should hate speech be allowed? Well, who determines what's hate speech or what's not, you know? And so the idea of like, you hear that and you go, no, hate's bad, so we shouldn't allow hate speech, right? But then you go, well, who's going to decide what's hateful and what's not hateful? Because like you sitting there nodding your head right now, I feel like you're hating me, Ben. Stop nodding your head. Somebody chop Ben's head off.
I was agreeing with you.
And so, yeah, I just, I don't know. I take constant screenshots when I'm on Twitter from different tweets that come to mind on narratives that take root. So there, I've been following. I'm not following the guy, but a lot of people I follow are following this guy, and so I keep seeing his tweets, and they end up just being screenshots that I say I'll come back to that later on the To Be the Church podcast. But here's one of them. He says, just to be clear, and this is during, it's during the abortion situation, that's going on with the Supreme Court. So that was like the big hot button issue for a couple of weeks there, and it will be again next year, obviously. But he goes, just to be clear, conservative Christians need to care about pregnant mothers just as much as unborn babies. Anything less is not pro-life. Progressive Christians need to care about unborn babies just as much as pregnant mothers. Anything less is not doing justice, And there's like, hundreds of likes and retweets and all these kinds of things. And I look at that and I'm like, I've grown up in a pretty conservative Christian world. I have never met a conservative Christian who doesn't care about pregnant mothers, but the idea is the conservative side, they don't care about the mother, right? And then the liberal side, they don't care about the baby. Hey, here's my centrist Christian view, right? Here's my third way. You both need to do that. Kind of the lecture to both sides. And I'm going, what universe are you living in that all the crisis pregnancy centers on the planet, they're all started by conservative Christians. The amount of people who adopt, the amount of people who give toward these kind of stuff, like in terms of charity toward these type of things, it's people on the conservative Christian side. And it's not like exclusively that, but like it's this total false narrative that and these kind of things get sewn in there to where it's like, oh yeah, well, conservatives, they don't, and you're going, dude, what world are you living in? But you get your likes and your retweets and your following on Twitter by making these false equivalency type of arguments, and I just think it's on so many different issues. And so then you go, where does that narrative come from? Where does the narrative come that let's say conservative Christians, and again, conservative theologically, I don't know if he's talking theologically or culturally or whatever, but where does that narrative come from that conservative Christians don't care about pregnant mothers? Like, where does that come from? It comes from like from the left saying, like, here's Westboro Baptist and they hate everybody. And that's the way Christians are, And so you're like, no one, like there's 4 people at that church. Like no one, what? Like no one in this world really believes that. And so I'm saying these narratives about like, this is the way conservative Christians believe. I'm going, because you can highlight the crazy such and such person that claimed they were a Christian. That's not what actual practicing Christians believe. And so I just think there's so many examples of that. And I think as Christians, in the intro, we talked about how to truly be the church. I think we got to be informed on these things and look into these. And I'm sorry to this listener that I'm, what was the charge? That they're universal things that I say are on the left, right?
Yeah.
Only on the left. Yeah. So and that's mostly me that does that. Sometimes you, and never Tyler. And so I think the universal things that he's speaking of there being bias that's treated as objective fact or any of those kinds of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. I see that. I see that on the left more so than I do on the right. But
you're acknowledging it's universal, but you're not saying it's like an equal.
Yeah,
it's not a 50-50 sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I would encourage everyone to who wants to think deeply and critically about this to go read Brett McCracken's book that came out earlier this year. We talked to him about it on this podcast. It's called The Wisdom Pyramid: Feeding Your Soul in a Post-Truth World. Yeah. And it makes it really clear like where we should start as it relates to wisdom, gaining truth, stuff like that, and then kind of what order we should put things in as people of God. So,
okay, here's a closing one for this. This is a guy named Scott Sauls. You probably have heard of him. Yeah, he's written a number of books and stuff. So he says, because I thought this way for a number of years, and I don't know if I still think this way, but I'm not sure. He says, for us preachers, the longer it takes people to figure out our politics, the more likely it is that we are preaching Jesus. What do you think? Because this is kind of the subject we're talking about, politics and et cetera. For us preachers, the longer it takes people to figure out our politics, the more likely it is that we are preaching Jesus.
I think that there was like a good long period there where, years where you would say like, I don't think our church people know where I stand politically. Mm-hmm. And I think that, and we kind of like held that as like that's good, you know? And I think that
I got that tattooed on me.
I think that like 2020 almost shattered any possibility of that for 99% of preachers.
Because of COVID?
Everything just 2020, there's that whole year, everything that kind of went on, like it was all everything. It was just like, oh man, I don't know how preachers who I also felt that way about that I don't know personally, whereas like, oh, I don't know their politics. I figured them out in 2020, based on their Twitter, based on their sermons, based on the way their churches responded to certain things and the way they did and stuff. But
I think from the pulpit, for me, if a text is, there's a clear application from it that kind of pokes at the ultra conservative side or the left, like I'll go there. I'm not afraid to and because I'm not necessarily planting a flag on either side, because I think when it comes to preaching, we're preaching the word. And so the authority here is, I believe this because I believe God has revealed it in his word. And, you can go with your implications and maybe where that view would land politically or something, but we're not preaching, I believe this because this is what political conservatives believe. It's because this is what God's word says. And then you kind of have to come to your own conclusions on that, in my opinion.
I would also say that that I think if you are able to hear or DC
what are you saying right now?
Like if you could not hear anything but the 40 minutes of a sermon. Uh-huh. Like if you didn't know policy, you didn't see tweets, you didn't hear podcasts, you just heard a sermon. I think that there's a lot of preachers who preach Jesus really well who you would never know their politics, right? Yeah. If the sermon is the only thing, because again, there may be moments where it's like, oh, he's going against the political right now. Oh, he's going against the political left because Scripture is speaks to all life and ruffles a lot of feathers that aren't strictly gospel oriented, and to say the political right has the gospel figured out is ridiculous. To say the political left has the gospel figured out is ridiculous. It's going to
I think it's kind of, the waters are muddy though for a lot of people, a lot of Christians right now. They don't really realize maybe why they believe what they believe, and it's not necessarily because of the political party they're affiliated with. Abortion is not a political issue. The reason we think abortion is wrong is because of a theological, anthropological issue. Human beings are made in the image of God. And so that's why we believe it. And of course it becomes politicized. And of course, if you believe that, you're most likely, at least on that issue and probably other things, going to land conservative politically. But I don't know. People are so wrapped. I think it's back to the McCracken book of their source of truth or their authority isn't always God's word. It's a politician or social media or these different things. And I think that's a bad thing. I think with the Let's Go Brandon, people aren't thinking Christianly when they accept it because it fits so well with how they feel politically. that they're not even, it's not even really like making them, oh, maybe that's actually not right for me to do, because it so fits with like, yes, stick it to the other side, and like, and I think that's good. People are confused, and they're on social media and watching cable news way too much, I think.
Yeah, it's yeah. I think there's like I was talking to another pastor about this a few weeks back. Like there are certain things that we could say in our preaching that are kind of trigger words, if you will, like for the right or the left, that we could say things in a certain way that would maybe betray our opinion on that. And I'm talking about more political type things, and to just be aware of the baggage that words have, you know? So when you're preaching a text that would, I mean, we've been preaching Ruth lately, right? And the outsider, the foreigner, those kind of things, being brought into the family and all that stuff. You could preach that in a way. I saw a tweet from somebody a few weeks back. It was a gal that was studying the book of Ruth, and she was like, the book of Ruth is all about social justice, you know? And I remember thinking like, oh man, so much there. And so, but that's where, if we had advertised like the book of Ruth is all about social justice, like right away you're going, okay, we just lit a fuse, because the term social justice and all the implications of what that means, and is that really what the book of Ruth is about? But again, her standpoint is the book of Ruth is about social justice because someone on the bottom of society gets pulled up to the top of society, and that actually brings justice there. And so I guess just understanding what those trigger concepts are, those trigger words are, and I don't know. I just think people assume too, like Ty, you were saying, there's things that would be more from rhetorically from the right or rhetorically from the left, because a lot of this is rhetoric. It's the way that the left or the right advertise themselves versus what their policies might be. And I think you got to be really careful in threading that needle when you're preaching, if you're going to preach Christ. But I don't know. I think Ty, I would have said years ago, with what he said in the tweet here, I would have gone, yeah, that I agree with that. I just wonder. I wonder it like because I feel like the longer it takes people to figure out our politics, the more likely it is that we're preaching Jesus. I wonder if we can try to get into this quote unquote objective middle ground so much that we become pretty. I don't know. Like jumping into that middle ground too much and always trying to play both sides of it. And I just wonder if we're capable of doing that. I think we could compromise the truth of Scripture at times by like going, well, no, I don't want to land there because I don't want to offend that person. Oh, and I don't want to offend that person. I don't want to make that person think I vote this way or that I'm registered as a this. And I think if you're going to preach Christ, like there's a prophetic aspect to this that is going to cut into the spirit of the ages narratives. And I think you've got to do that boldly as the text leads you there, and preach Christ in that regard. So I don't know. The longer I go in a role like this in one place, the more I go, you know, I keep political stuff like off of social media. Like I don't try to dive into those worlds on the things that I'm putting out there just because it's, you know, you don't want to, you understand, like there are Republicans and Democrats that need Jesus, and there are those in our churches.
The commitment of the preacher is to preach the text. And so we should, like, because what you were talking about with words, sometimes we can be afraid of like, that's what the text says, but I don't want to be misinterpreted as a liberal because the text is all about justice for the oppressed. And so it's like, you shouldn't care about that. Like, preach the text, because I think probably in our tribe, if you want to call it, that there's like a push against kind of the social gospel, social justice, that it's almost like we aren't doing justice to those types of texts and that theme in Scripture, because we're like, that's not the gospel. The gospel is not, you know, social justice. And I think that can be an overcorrection, because the Bible has a lot to say about loving your neighbor as yourself, and God's heart for the vulnerable and the oppressed, and we shouldn't be afraid of those things.
Yeah, so if you want to reach out and ask Andrew directly who he votes for, or ask us any questions like that, podcast@toBeTheChurch.com is the best way to do that. You can do it on social media as well. Guys, we did it. Another year in the books, 2021.
This is
our, what did we start this in, 15, I think? 2015? So this is the end of year 6. And here we go. Let's on to another year. We'll see you next week.